In just 6 years, Germany went from a broken nation to the most feared military power on earth. They conquered France in 6 weeks. They brought Europe to its knees. Their war machine seemed unstoppable. But behind the propaganda, behind the lightning victories, was a regime built on lies, brutality, and a gamble that would cost millions of lives. This is the story of the German war machine, from its secret birth in the shadows of Versailles to its final, catastrophic collapse in the ruins of Berlin. This is the war as Germany saw it. January 1933. Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, but the country he inherits is shackled. The Treaty of Versailles, signed after Germany's defeat in World War I, had stripped the nation of its military power. The army was limited to just 100,000 men, no tanks, no heavy artillery, no air force. Even the navy was reduced to a handful of coastal vessels. For many Germans, this wasn't peace, it was humiliation. But even before Hitler took power, Germany's military elite had been quietly plotting their return. Secret agreements with the Soviet Union allowed weapons testing on Russian soil, far from the eyes of international inspectors. Arms factories were disguised as civilian industries. Military planning was hidden behind fake organizations. What changed with Hitler wasn't the desire to rebuild Germany's military. It was the speed and scale. In 1935, Hitler made his move. He openly announced the reintroduction of conscription, transforming the restricted Reichswehr into the Wehrmacht. The world protested, but did nothing. The army expanded from 100,000 to millions. Tank divisions were formed. And the Luftwaffe, Germany's new air force, was officially unveiled, led by Hermann Göring. The Navy, though limited, began building a new fleet of submarines, U-boats, designed to threaten enemy supply lines in a future war. But this wasn't just about weapons. It was about doctrine. German officers, scarred by the trench warfare of World War I, were determined never to repeat that nightmare. They developed a new style of warfare, blitzkrieg, lightning war, fast, brutal, overwhelming. Tanks and motorized infantry would punch through enemy lines. Aircraft would strike deep behind enemy positions, sowing chaos. The goal wasn't attrition, it was collapse. Hit the enemy so hard, so fast, they couldn't recover. By 1939, Germany had become a militarized nation. Its economy was geared for war. Its people were told this was their destiny, and the world was about to find out just how deadly this new German war machine truly was. September 1st, 1939. 4:45 a.m. Without warning, without a declaration of war, German forces smashed across the Polish border. But this attack didn't come out of nowhere. It had been meticulously planned for months, and it was justified by a lie. The night before, German soldiers dressed in Polish uniforms staged a fake attack on a German radio station near the border. They left behind bodies, concentration camp prisoners, murdered and dressed as Polish saboteurs. Nazi propaganda screamed that Poland had attacked first, that Germany was the victim. It was all fabricated. But it gave Hitler the pretext he needed. The invasion was devastating. Over 1.5 million German troops, 2,500 tanks, 2,000 aircraft, all unleashed at once. This was blitzkrieg in action. Panzer divisions raced deep into Polish territory, bypassing resistance and cutting off retreat routes. The Luftwaffe obliterated Polish airfields in the first hours. Seizing total air superiority, Polish forces fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. Within days, the defensive lines collapsed. Within weeks, Warsaw was surrounded. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, fulfilling a secret pact with Germany to divide Poland between them. By the end of September, Poland had ceased to exist. For Nazi Germany, this was proof. Proof that their new way of war worked. Proof that they were unstoppable. But 2 days after the invasion began, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The World War had begun. May 10, 1940, Germany launched its assault on Western Europe. The target, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. France had prepared for this. They built the Maginot Line, a massive fortress system along their eastern border, designed to stop any German invasion. But the Germans didn't attack the Maginot Line. Instead, they did the unthinkable. They pushed through the Ardennes, a dense, hilly forest that French commanders believed was impassable for tanks. They were wrong. German panzer divisions smashed through the Ardennes, crossed the Meuse River at Sedan, and broke into open country. Within days, they had cut the Allied armies in two, trapping British and French forces against the coast. The Netherlands fell in 5 days, Belgium, overwhelmed, and France, proud, powerful France, was collapsing. At Dunkirk, over 300,000 British and French soldiers were evacuated by sea in a desperate rescue operation. It was a miracle, but it was also a retreat. On June 14, 1940, German troops marched into Paris. The city fell without a fight. 8 days later, France surrendered. It had taken just 6 weeks. Back in Germany, the reaction was euphoria. Parades filled the streets. Hitler was hailed as a genius. The Wehrmacht was seen as invincible. For a generation that had grown up with the shame of Versailles, this was revenge. This was redemption. The Blitzkrieg had worked again, faster, more decisively than anyone imagined. But there was one enemy left standing: Britain. Summer 1940, with France defeated, Hitler turned his attention to Britain. The plan was simple: destroy the Royal Air Force, dominate the skies, and launch an invasion, Operation Sea Lion. The Luftwaffe was confident. They had crushed every enemy so far. Britain would be next. But this time, things were different. The British had radar, an early warning system that allowed them to track incoming German bombers. Their fighters, the Spitfire and the Hurricane, were fast, deadly, and defending their own skies. German bombers, flying long distances across the English Channel, were vulnerable. Their fighter escorts had limited fuel and couldn't stay long over British airspace. The Luftwaffe launched wave after wave of attacks, targeting airfields, radar stations, and eventually cities. London burned. Thousands of civilians died. But the RAF held. British pilots, exhausted and outnumbered, kept fighting. They shot down German planes faster than they could be replaced. Luftwaffe losses mounted. By September, it was clear Germany had failed. Operation Sea Lion was postponed, then quietly cancelled. For the first time since 1939, the German war machine had been stopped. Hitler had promised a quick victory. Instead, he got a bloody stalemate. And the failure had consequences. It shattered the myth of invincibility. It showed the world that Germany could be beaten. But Hitler wasn't finished. If he couldn't conquer Britain, he would turn east. June 22, 1941. 3 a.m., over 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border. It was the largest invasion in human history. Operation Barbarossa. Hitler believed the Soviet Union was weak, that it would collapse in weeks, just like Poland and France. He was wrong. The initial assault was devastating. Soviet forces, caught off guard, were overrun. Entire armies were encircled and destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken. German tanks raced toward Leningrad, Moscow, and Kiev. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies. By autumn, it seemed like the Soviets were finished, but they didn't surrender. The Soviet Union was vast, its resources were deep, and its people were willing to fight to the death. As the German advance slowed, the weather turned. Autumn rains turned the roads into rivers of mud. Tanks bogged down. Supply lines stretched to breaking point. And then, winter came. The German army wasn't prepared. Soldiers wore summer uniforms. Vehicles froze. Frostbite became as deadly as Soviet bullets. The Blitzkrieg, designed for quick victories, had run into an enemy that refused to collapse. And for German soldiers on the Eastern Front, the war became a nightmare. The Eastern Front wasn't a battlefield. It was hell. Soldiers marched through endless mud that clung to their boots like cement. Winter cold, so brutal, it froze their breath. Supply lines that couldn't keep up. Hunger became constant. Sleep became a luxury. Fear never left. Letters home hinted at the truth. This place has no end. We don't know when we'll return. If we return. But back in Germany, propaganda told a different story. Newsreels showed smiling soldiers, victorious advances, a collapsing enemy. The reality was the opposite. Soviet forces were regrouping, counterattacks were growing stronger, and the German army, that stretched across thousands of miles, was slowly bleeding to death. The soldiers knew it, the officers knew it, but no one dared say it out loud. August 1942, the German Sixth Army reached Stalingrad, a city on the Volga River. What followed was 5 months of the most brutal urban combat in history. Street by street, building by building, room by room. The Soviets refused to give up. Every block was defended to the death. The city became a graveyard. By November, the German army was exhausted. Then the Soviets struck back. A massive counter-offensive that encircled the entire Sixth Army. Over 250,000 German soldiers were trapped. Hitler ordered them to fight to the last man. No retreat, no surrender. But by January 1943, it was over. The Sixth Army surrendered. 91,000 soldiers marched into Soviet captivity. Most would never return. Stalingrad was Germany's first catastrophic defeat, and it shattered something deeper than just military strength. It broke German morale. For the first time, people began to whisper the unthinkable. Germany might lose this war. By 1943, the war had come home. Germany mobilized everything, every factory, every worker, every resource. Women, once told their place was in the home, now worked in arms factories. Teenagers were sent to the front. The elderly joined the Volkssturm, a last-ditch militia armed with outdated rifles, and millions of forced laborers, prisoners, deportees, civilians from occupied territories, were worked to death in German factories and mines. This was total war, and it consumed everything. Meanwhile, Allied bombers turned German cities into infernos. Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin. Night after night, the bombs fell, entire neighborhoods vanished, tens of thousands died. The propaganda machine tried to maintain morale. Speeches promised ultimate victory. Newsreels showed heroic resistance, but the people knew the truth. Germany was losing. Not everyone believed in Hitler's war. In Munich, a group of students called the White Rose distributed leaflets condemning the regime. They were caught, executed. On July 20, 1944, a group of German officers tried to assassinate Hitler with a bomb. The plot failed. Hitler survived. The reprisal was brutal. Over 5,000 people were arrested. Hundreds were executed, hanged, beheaded, tortured. The message was clear: there would be no mercy for traitors. But the resistance, though crushed, proved something important. Even in Nazi Germany, not everyone followed the lies. April 1945, the Red Army closed in on Berlin. The city was surrounded, bombed, burning. German soldiers, many of them boys and old men, fought in the rubble. But it was hopeless. On April 30th, in a bunker beneath the city, Adolf Hitler took his own life. A week later, Germany surrendered. The war was over. What remained was devastation. Cities reduced to rubble, millions dead, families shattered. The regime that promised greatness had delivered only ruin. And the soldiers, the civilians, the survivors, they were left to pick up the pieces of a country that no longer existed. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible historical content. Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. The German war machine was built on speed, deception, and overwhelming force. For a time, it seemed unstoppable. But it was built on lies, and it was fueled by the suffering of millions. In the end, the Blitzkrieg couldn't win a war of attrition. The propaganda couldn't hide the truth. And the regime's brutality couldn't break the will of its enemies. What began with a promise of glory ended in total collapse. This was the German war, not the myth, not the propaganda, but the reality of a nation that gambled everything and lost.